Okay, welcome to our third Meet the SU session. I'm delighted to be joined by our very own Bethan Banks, who's going to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her role in the SU. What we've mentioned in the previous ones, if you've got any questions, please put them in the comment section. This is live, so, well, it's pre-recorded, but live. So if you notice any connection issues, then please get back to us, put a comment in the comment section, and we'll answer as best as we can. Bethan, over to you.
Hi, so as Sam said, my name is Bethan. I am the Policy and Procedural Advisor at the SU. So part of that role is that I manage the advice and support service. So I think Sam's got a couple of questions for me now, and we'll go into them and I can tell you a little bit more about what that entails.
Absolutely. So I've got a little script of some questions here. Anything that appears in the comment section we'll try and cover as well whilst we do it, and that will be done via chat. So Bethan, advice and support, that can be quite a broad topic. So specifically from an SU perspective, what do we offer advice and support wise?
So I'd like to think that we offer advice and support on anything to do with just student life and what you might encounter as your time as a student. So this can be anything from academic support, pastoral support, housing support, or just generally any questions you have where you're not quite sure where to direct them. If you come to the SU, we'd like to think we can either help you answer them there and then, or refer you on to the best service or person that's going to be able to help you with that.
Superb. Okay, little touch now. Academic support. What do you mean by academic support? What kind of stuff does that entail?
So this will be different to the kind of academic support that you would get for your. So it's not going to be about writing your assessment or your course content, but this is academic in relation to any of the university's procedures. So there are a large number of procedures that you'll have to comply to as a student. You agree to this during enrolment, and obviously we do not expect you to know absolutely everything from the get-go. But during your time at university, there may be a point where you come across something that you need to engage in one of these processes. So what we are here to help you kind of manage that and help you through that process and give you a bit of more information.
Okay, that leads on very lovely. This script you've given me is perfect. Actually, it's going really well. You've touched upon a number of university processes here. Can you expand on these a little more? So, yeah, what type of processes do the university have, and just a little bit more detail as to what a student will expect when they come here.
Okay, so I'll touch upon, I think there's four main ones that students typically come to us for on a very regular basis. So if you ever find yourself in a position where you need to engage in one of these processes, you are not the first student, you are not on your own, there'll be lots of students in the same boat as you. But what I'm going to do is I'll touch upon the main four, give a bit of basic information just for you to know off the top of your head that'll hopefully stick just in case you find yourself in this position later down the line. But again, these are just four of the topics that we can help you through if you get to a point where you really need it. So the first one will be mitigating circumstances. So, things, as much as things typically we hope will run smoothly, there might be a point during your academic kind of career that something happens, you get ill, you might have a bereavement, and something just happens that comes up and interrupts your studies and kind of affects you writing your assessments, your concentration, maybe attending your lectures. So there is a process the university has called mitigating circumstances that you can engage in to make sure that your academic progress isn't affected. So that is actually a new process this year. There have been some changes. So there is an automatic 20 working day extension that you can apply for as a student. That if anything comes up, you can do that online to make sure your academics or your deadlines aren't affected. If you go through that and you still have circumstances that continue to affect you, you'll then go through the full mitigating circumstances process. So at that point, what we will always advise is that if you have any sort of evidence or statements about the circumstances that are occurring, so if you're ill, see your doctor, get a doctor's note. If you're experiencing mental health issues and you're engaging with student services, you can get a statement from your counsellor. Bereavement, obviously, this is always a really difficult one for evidence, but a death certificate, if you're seeing a bereavement counsellor, that counts as evidence. Sometimes an order of service. So obviously, we really do appreciate some of the circumstances that might occur will be really sensitive. But see if you can find evidence just to show what's going on. And again, if you don't know or you're confused, you can come to our service then, and we will kind of help you try and pull that information together and let you know what maybe will be able to help in your circumstances then. But that's the mitigating circumstances process. So hopefully, overall, it will be easier this year because obviously you'll get the self-certification, which will get you kind of a 20-day extension and allow you, hopefully, for your circumstances to resolve themselves by the time you get to that point. But again, the mitigating circumstances process is still there for students to kind of help themselves. So takes us nicely then onto appeals then, which is kind of what I would always explain as it's the MITCIRC's process after the exam board. So you should always try and engage in mitigating circumstances as soon as the process arises. That's really, really important. If you leave it too long, and then obviously at the end of every term, there'll be exam boards that kind of assess all the information and the assessments you've already done. If that exam board sits and you don't have MITCIRCs in place, then, if you have been affected and, you might not achieve a grade that you would have if you didn't have those circumstances occurring, and say you fail, and you'll get asked to redo the assessment capped at your minimum pass mark. What an appeal will then do is take into account those mitigating circumstances, but what you'll have to do at this point is evidence why you couldn't put mitigating circumstances in the first place. So it's a slightly more complicated process just because obviously the university will tell you to engage in mitigating circumstances. All of this literature is advertised, so we would expect all students to do that. But there are some cases where you can't. If you're in hospital and you don't have access to a computer, then it will be pretty difficult to kind of put MITCIRC in. Similarly, if you are experiencing a really bad mental health problem, there are some times where it's really, really hard to engage. But again, at this point then, what we would have to do is say, go through the appeals process, and we'll have to kind of get evidence then to show why you couldn't do that process to begin with. So, there's a way through it, but it is slightly more difficult then. So that's why we always encourage MITCIRCs as soon as possible. There's another kind of little topic for appeals that obviously you wouldn't typically do before an exam board, and that's defects and irregularities. So this could be anything in relation to the written assessment or the written instructions to your assessment that have affected your performance because they might have been wrong. So for example, if you go into an exam and your lecturer has told you, right, you've got 2 hours to do this exam, there'll be 4 questions, so you kind of then do your preparation, 30 minutes per question, and you think you're all fine. You turn it to the exam, and then they turn around and say, okay, you've got an hour and a half to complete. Obviously, this would be a circumstance that's a defect that's no fault of your own, and it's been misinformation from, previous instruction from a lecturer. So what we would do at that point then is help you evidence that and put an appeal forward under those grounds then. It is quite rare that happens. Obviously, everyone likes to be on the ball and make sure all the instruction is correct from the start. But if that did ever happen, or, there might be 2 lecturers that have 2 different ideas of what an assessment might be, we will kind of help you kind of put that in an appeal then. But hopefully, like I said, that's very rare and that's not going to happen. But I think that's the appeals process then. That's that one done. Yeah. I know, I caught quite a lot. But there's a lot of
Superb, keep going.
And I think, for students, it's really important if you hear this at the start of the year, it'll stick for when you need it. So fingers crossed. So the next thing is complaints. Again, we hope that you'll never get to a position where you want to put in a complaint. But if there's ever any issues, particularly with your course, on campus, with another student, with a particular lecturer, with a member of staff, the complaints process is there then to help students basically alleviate that problem. So the goal of a complaint would be outcome driven. That it's a case of you put this complaints form in, we will assess it, And then at the end of it, we will have resolved the issue that you have. I would say we always try and do it on an informal basis first, because obviously it'll be quicker and easier process. If you sit and chat to your lecturer about an issue you're having and they can resolve it, fantastic. Obviously the process, can take up to 30 working days to assess in the first instance. And then if it is found that there is grounds for complaint and you carry on, it's kind of stage by stage, then you've got more 30 working days. So it can be quite a long period. So, the sooner we can resolve an issue, the better. But what we can do when a complaint arises is obviously support the student, let them know of the different stages and potential kind of ways they'll be able to address their issue, and then just support them through that. Because obviously a complaint can be a quite daunting time, especially if you're making a complaint about the course or a lecturer. Students can feel quite uncomfortable, as if they don't want to disadvantage themselves. They'll be worried about their marks will be affected. And obviously we can reassure everybody that that will not be the case. No one will ever be disadvantaged by making a complaint. But the process there is just to make sure everything runs smoothly and everyone's okay and everyone's happy, where they are in the university and everything's running smoothly. So, we will just help support students through that. We can attend meetings, help students kind of pull together statements and evidence. And that's kind of how we help on a complaints ground then. So obviously if anyone ever has any issues, they can come to us. Or again, through the rep structure and the vice president, that's typically how things would work informally. But, if it couldn't get resolved at that stage, then that's typically when students come and see me and we kind of start doing, the slightly more formal processes then. So that would be how I would help with the complaints. That takes me on to my last little section at the minute, which is unfair practice. So from the start, all students will be told about referencing, and it will be drummed into everybody how you reference. You have to be sure that, you quote everything properly. If you're paraphrasing, you still have to reference, and it's a really difficult system to get your head around. If you've come from school or kind of college where you haven't had to reference before, or if you come from another international university where maybe the referencing laws were different, it can be quite complicated. But it's really important students try and get their heads around that. And if it is ever a case where somebody doesn't kind of follow those referencing guidance, then what they can have then is what's called an allegation of unfair practice. And what that is that students have just gone against the unfair practice regulations at the university. So, and, essentially I think it's kind of what's known as plagiarism. Yeah. Which is kind of then what students would maybe call kind of cheating on your work then. So kind of using textbooks, lecture notes, or other kind of sources without referencing it to other people's work. If you maybe take another student's work and claim that it's your own, those are the kind of things that would come under this then. So obviously the main thing to avoid doing that is for students to know what their referencing kind of rules are and stick to them. And again, if you ever have any issues that are affecting your studies and you start to panic, don't try and force yourself to get an essay in and plagiarize. Don't copy another student's work, because you'll get into more trouble than you would have in the first place. So that's why the mitigating circumstances procedure is there to say, I'm not going to meet my deadline. I need a bit of an extension because of these circumstances. But, some students do panic and kind of get themselves in a situation where they probably wouldn't have done that if they didn't have that stress and that pressure elsewhere. But, it's definitely not the way to do it. But on occasion it happens. So if it does, and a student gets an allegation of unfair practice, similarly to all the other processes, what we can do at the SU is make sure they understand the process and what's going to happen, any timescales that may be kind of in relation to this. So for example, if you want to challenge an allegation of unfair practice, it takes 8 weeks for a committee, which, is quite a long time, but it's because, that's the process that's in place, and, each student has a kind of fair opportunity to have their say. And because this does happen, that's kind of the process that has to kind of go forward then to make sure everything's impartial and everything's done the right way then. So that could happen. If you go to a committee of inquiry, obviously it'll be slightly different this year with COVID. So last year it would have been a meeting on campus. This year it's likely to be through Teams or via correspondence. But what the SU can do then is attend on your behalf if you're unable to attend, or with you then for pastoral support. So obviously, you know, we are there to kind of hold your hand through the process, make sure you understand what's going on, and kind of be an extra pair of eyes and ears to make sure everything's running smoothly. And if you've got any questions, we can help you then. So if unfair practice ever occurs, then again, like everything else, we'll come, we can represent you, and we can just kind of support you through the process then. And I think that's where I'm going to stop on those four for now.
That's an extensive list of stuff that we support on, and well done for being able to support on all those things by yourself, may I add. Okay, this question's a little bit of a, are those the only processes you advise on? That's an exhaustive list as it is already, but are there any stuff which we add in terms of that?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think the bottom line is that we advise on any university process. And there is a very long list. That's why I've kind of chosen 4 and stuck to those, even though I spoke a lot. Obviously, there's a lot more that we do advise on. So, for example, changing course, deferring or suspending your studies, what's called a fitness to study or a fitness to practice, if a student ever finds himself in that situation, bullying and harassment, any sort of racism issues. You know, there's a lot that we will help students and support students through. So any process that's relating to university, you can come to us for help, is the bottom line. But obviously, you know, those 4 are the main 4 that we typically see on a day-to-day basis. But if any student ever has any issues, they can come to us and we will support them through that process then.
That's really encouraging, especially from a student perspective, that we do offer that amount of stuff. And I'll tell you what, I've learned quite a great deal from actually just listening to this today. So fantastic. One word you did mention within the kind of the list of which you gave was representation. What does representation entail, and do students need to have representation at all?
So representation is the word that we use just to say that, you know, if you are going along to a university process, in all of the procedures, it says you are entitled to representation. So typically people will come to the SU because we know the processes, and it's not representation like a legal representative. So we won't come and kind of fight your case and fight your corner, but we are here just to sort of make sure you understand the process. We can provide pastoral support and kind of give you that sort of hand-holding through the process and answer any questions that a student has then. So a lot of that will include attendance in meetings or, you know, committees or disciplinaries where a student has to attend and then can bring someone along to that. So that's what we would define as representation. Students don't have to have representation. It's a preference. You know, if you feel confident going through those procedures on your own, then that is totally fine. You know, students don't have to come to us, but obviously we just want to let them know that we are available if ever they do find it a little bit overwhelming or just aren't really sure, because, you know, all of these procedural documents are really complicated. I've worked just 6 years now, so obviously I kind of have got my head around most of them, and I can kind of answer questions off the top of my head. If this is the first time you're ever going through that situation, 1, you'll automatically have the stress of having to kind of go through the process, and 2, trying to understand that is, you know, it can be really complicated. So we are just here then to sort of help through that process and kind of attend those representation meetings if needed then.
That's perfect, Beth. And I think we've covered quite a great deal in this little 20-minute slot, to be honest. So we've covered a bit about what advice and support actually is, what we mean by academic support, the 4 kind of main sort of processes that the university offers in terms of appeals, mitigating circumstances, unfair practice and complaints. We've also looked at other processes that we advise on. We've mentioned representation that you can or can have as a student, depending on your preference. We've also looked at our pastoral support as well. So if you are trying to complete these type of procedures and processes, we are here to support and guide along those lines as well if you need it. The last thing I'm going to ask you, and then I'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your day, is how the students contact you if they need any further questions or information about any of the stuff discussed today.
So the best way will be through the Students' Union Advice email address. So that will be suadvice@cardiffmet.ac.uk. They can find us in the offices. Obviously, with COVID at the minute, we would encourage students not to come into the office. So instead of that, what I'm doing is I have telephone calls or video chats through Microsoft Teams. So what I would ask students to do to organise those then is drop a line to the SU Advice inbox with, just a little bit of their availability and what they need to discuss, and I will organise and arrange those chats for them then. So that is what our kind of availability is at the moment. That might change in future, obviously if kind of the university restrictions for COVID change, but those will be the best ways to get in touch with us, obviously, during this first term.
Okay, that is absolutely perfect, Bethan. Thank you very much for your time today. That's a massive amount of information and really important for our students as they're coming into Cardiff Met. So appreciate your time. If you do have any further comments or questions, please put them in the comment section now. And Bethan will hopefully have a look at these and then get back to you in due course. If there is anything that we need to check with the university considering the guidelines, we will do that. So give us 2 to 3 days if we can, just to make sure that we get the accurate information for you. All right. Cheers, Beth. Absolute pleasure. And I'll catch you in a bit. All right. All right. Thank you very much. Cheers. Right, 2 seconds.